Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones, back here today with plenty of thoughts about Purdue's 24-3 loss against Iowa on Saturday afternoon at Ross-Ade Stadium. A rather disappointing performance. That is now the lowest point total of the Jeff Brom era. Purdue has lost back-to-back games for the first time since 2020. Purdue falls to 5-4 overall, 3-3 in Big Ten play, and has put themselves in a nearly impossible position to make it to Indianapolis as the Big Ten West champion, when a few weeks ago it seemed like Purdue may be in the driver's seat to get to that position. However, that's not reality. Things are not great when you look at this team. So let's jump in and talk about the 24-3 loss to Iowa. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at Boilers Beyond if you don't already. Plenty of thoughts there. Basketball coming up this week. I know that's probably a relief for many of you. We'll have plenty of stuff from Mackey Arena for both games. And of course, plenty to talk about with Purdue football with 3 games remaining. Not much good to say about this game. You know, you want to use the weather as an excuse. And yes, the weather was not ideal. Now, it stayed dry. There was a little drizzle towards the end of the first half, but outside of that, the rain was not an issue for Purdue, Iowa on Saturday. It was very windy. Very, very windy. Probably as windy of a game as I can remember at Ross-Ade Stadium. They told the tailgaters no using tents. You could see the uprights kind of swaying throughout most of the game. It was really, really windy. Purdue knew that was coming. This wasn't some morning of development. It was known pretty much all week, and especially towards the end of the week, that it was going to be really windy. And it wasn't a surprise, but based off of the way Purdue played, you would think it was. One team was very equipped to play in Saturday's conditions. The other was Purdue. It's problematic when you're a pass-heavy team that has to play in conditions that make it difficult to pass, but that is reality at least once a year in the Big Ten. This is still the Midwest, especially you get into October, November. The weather happens up here. It's not new. This is fall weather in the Midwest. Stuff happens like this. And Purdue really came out of the gates throwing the ball more than I expected. Now, I'll preface everything. Jeff Brom has forgotten more about football than I will ever know in my entire life. And when you look at offensive play calling, it even gets more true. But it was very curious to me how much Purdue tried to throw the ball early. You know, we saw a very interesting dynamic in this game because the wind was coming straight out of the south. So you had one team going directly into the wind and one team with the wind directly at their backs. And Purdue got the ball early on their first drive. They moved the chains a couple times thanks to Devin Mockabee. But for the most part, Purdue didn't run the ball all that frequently. You look at the distribution, 43 passes to 31 runs. Now, that is skewed a little bit by four attempts by Aiden O'Connell, 3 of which were sacks. So, you look at it really, that's 46 to 28. Pass plays to run plays. I think, Purdue isn't equipped to run the ball as a power running team, especially against Iowa's defense. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the fact that Iowa's defense is incredible. They have a very good group. They're tight on the outside. They're really nice in the middle, stopping the run. Couple of really good linebackers with Campbell and Benson. But Purdue really didn't run the ball that poorly. 4.6 per attempt for Maccabee, 3.9 for Downing. Not terrible, but where Purdue got in trouble was throwing the ball. Aiden O'Connell didn't have a good game again. By all accounts, this was a poor game. Under 50% passing, came in at 47%, only 168 yards, 2 picks. You know, a big part of this team being a contender in the Big Ten West was going to lie on Aiden O'Connell being a very high-level quarterback for Purdue. And I want to be careful with how I say this, but he hasn't been a high-level quarterback for Purdue this year. When you really look at it, he had a very good performance against a really bad Nebraska defense. He tore them apart, but that's a bad defense. He struggled against Penn State, didn't make the big throws when they were needed. He struggled for a long time against Syracuse. The offense took so long to get going there. He gets injured. Who knows how healthy he's been for some of these games. But the last 2 weeks, you know, against the two best defenses he's played, it hasn't been pretty. It's been quite the struggle. You know, we're sitting here now, going into the last quarter of the season, he's at 15 touchdowns to 10 picks. His completion percentage has taken a big drop from last year to this, sitting at 64% now, which is still good. That's still a decent completion percentage, but that's not the level he was at last year. I think we're seeing how important those receivers were to last year's offense for Purdue. David Bell was phenomenal. Milton Wright was really good. Jackson Anthrop is a number 3 option. Pretty reliable. You look at this group and you look at these stats and it's mind-boggling. Charlie Jones, 11 catches, 104 yards. 19 targets. Purdue threw the ball 43 times, and Charlie Jones has 19 targets. That's a lot. That's probably too many when you really think about it. You know, you look at that number, 11 for 104, but 41 of those came on the deep shot early in the game. Outside of that, not a lot of space for him to operate. And you look at the receivers besides Charlie Jones, and look, no one has emerged as a number 2. We spent all of September talking about that before I kind of gave it up because there isn't a number 2 receiver on this team. Payne Durham's your number 2 pass catcher, but look, 2 for 35. I mean, just not a lot going on here. Purdue doesn't have receivers that create much separation. They don't have speed demons out there. These guys who needed to take leaps from last year to this. Mershawn Rice, absent in this game. He played, but he's not in the stat book. Abdur-Rahman Yassin, 1 catch for 4 yards. Deion Burks, 1 catch for 0. You only had 3 wide receivers catch a pass. Not very good. All in all, this pass game is not all that great to begin with. And then you factor in the wind, it's really problematic for Purdue. So why they didn't go to the run more, I don't really know. I understand the idea. You know, you can't run the ball that much against Iowa. You have to be able to pass the ball. But it became very troubling when Purdue has the ball, 1st and goal at the 2. I believe they were down 17-0 at that point. And, you know, you have the student section chanting, run the ball, because Purdue opts to throw it 3 straight times from the 2-yard line. Aiden O'Connell takes a sack for close to 15 yards, and you have to settle for a field goal. That's really frustrating. You know, I don't know. Devin Maccabee's been fantastic for you this year. I think Dylan Downing's a fine number 2, but there wasn't much to generate a run game. All this talk of Tyrone Tracy playing running back, where is it? Kobe Lewis, all in all, a depth piece. He's barely played this year. I was excited about him when he transferred from Central Michigan, but we haven't seen a whole lot from him. So you're looking at this offense, and it's rather limited. I know a lot of the talk from this game lies on the defense, and I kind of agree. What did you do during the bye week? It's kind of my thought when you look at the defense, because you had 2 full weeks to prepare for a very limited offense, and you let Spencer Petras outplay Aiden O'Connell, and it wasn't close. Spencer Petras was the better quarterback on Saturday. That's a awfully damning thing to say, but I don't think you can even argue it. The offense for Iowa just moved well. Caleb Johnson tore Purdue apart. Granted, that 75-yard run really inflates the numbers, but, Purdue didn't look like they were ready to play. We know how much the secondary has struggled. We saw Cam Allen come off the bench. Bryce Hampton started over him at safety. Probably not great. Just, a sign of what's going on there. It was good, I thought, that Corey Trice and Jamari Brown played, but both were on a bit of a snap count. Neither played as much as they normally do. You saw Iowa physically manhandle Purdue. And what's really unfortunate for Purdue is that's happened 2 games in a row here. That Iowa-Wisconsin identity has dominated you twice in a row. And it's taken you from thinking that this season could be quite special to likely a very average bowl game and saying goodbye to a whole lot of your key players. This one, I think, stings. Not even stings, because it's just a thud. It was a complete no-show by Purdue. It was all around poor. It got off to a bad omen when Jack Ansell comes out there for his first punt of the day and just completely shanks it. Not good. Just not good. Purdue's defense wasn't able to create any disruption. They got to Petras a couple times, but as a whole, there was no disruption here. Purdue's secondary left some wide open holes. Laporta got him a couple of times. Nico Reganey was absolutely wide open on his touchdown catch. Just very, very frustrating if you're Purdue. And I think you look ahead now at where Purdue sits. There isn't much of a reason to feel great about Purdue going to Illinois. I don't think Illinois is that good. We just saw them get blown out by Michigan State, but they're going to beat Purdue, I would think. You look at what Purdue's doing right now. It is clear that something isn't right. There was no fire on that sidelines. There was no energy. There was nothing for Purdue on Saturday. And that it becomes one of the more disappointing losses of the Brom era, I think. I wonder what happened during the bye week. What went on? Because this team didn't play like they had 2 weeks to prepare. The wind is not that much of an excuse. It really isn't. And I think it is worth factoring in, but only scoring 3 points is not good. And there really weren't that many, real scoring threats. Now, they were moving the ball when O'Connell threw his second interception, but other than that, they really didn't move the ball well. Rather frustrating for an offensive program. And you don't like to use the linear thing all that much, but in year 6, you don't want to be getting blown out in back-to-back games by Iowa and Wisconsin on years when they really aren't the same Iowa and Wisconsin. They aren't that good, but they physically dominated Purdue. You're sitting at 5-4. I don't think you're going to beat Illinois, but you still have Northwestern and Indiana on the schedule. Those are games you should win. Those are games that you absolutely have to win. I think to go 7-5, all things considered, with how good this team actually is, and by that I mean how good this team really isn't, I think that's acceptable. I think it's a little disappointing. I talked about this after Wisconsin. You look at where Purdue is and has been this season, and yes, they could be better. They could have won that game at Syracuse. They could have won that game against Penn State, but they still could have lost to Florida Atlantic. They could have lost to Minnesota and Maryland and Nebraska. This season has had a lot of ups and downs, but as you look at where Purdue is right now, they are probably going to go under that season win total of 7.5 out in Vegas. They had a guy who was second team All Big Ten at quarterback last year who will not be an All Big Ten quarterback this year. At least I would be absolutely stunned if he is, because he's not playing to that level. And you have a lot of guys out there that are just a guy. They're not a difference maker. They're just rank and file players, and that's what's getting really frustrating. That's where you really don't feel great about where this team is. It feels like another November where Purdue fans are saying, all right, it's time for basketball. And of course it is. Basketball starts on Tuesday, a couple of games this week. But at the end of the day, this wasn't what this season was supposed to be like. There was good reason to be optimistic about this season. There were definitely reasons to hesitate and be a little hesitant about what could come. But as a whole, really not all that great when you look at where Purdue is right now. The final 3 weeks will go a long way in shaping perception of this season. Purdue, if they can pull it off on Saturday, things change pretty quickly. But as of right now, I think fans are pretty rightfully disappointed. There's a lot of discontent out there. No, Jeff Brom's not getting fired. You see the message board posters out there with that. That's not happening, nor should it. But you do have to feel like these last 2 weeks have been a bit of a step back for Purdue. If they're able to rebound, I'd be impressed to see it. But as we're sitting here right now, Purdue got a lot of guys back healthy for this game, and it didn't make a difference at all. Purdue was blown out. They were blown away in the wind, and Iowa did what Iowa does to so many teams. And now for Purdue, you move forward and you try to cling to something and find a decent bowl destination. I know the bowl games aren't as luxurious as they used to be. That's the product of a playoff system where bowl games have been devalued in the eyes of most people. But are you going to go to a reasonable bowl? Are you going to go to something decent? Or are you going to go to the Pinstripe Bowl? I saw one had Purdue going to the Birmingham Bowl. Look, I don't think anyone really wants to go to Birmingham, Alabama, and I don't think anyone really wants to go sit in New York City in late December. Or are you going to go somewhere decent? That's what it's going to come down to. Whether Purdue will do it or not, we'll see. For many of you, you're pumped up for basketball. As I said, 2 games this week: Milwaukee on Tuesday, Austin Peay on Friday. Albeit both of them, I will be tweeting out my thoughts for you all. Purdue looked pretty good last week. Granted, it was Truman State. They weren't very good at all. But I was very encouraged by what I saw from Purdue. I thought that combination of Trey Kaufman-Renn and Caleb Furst is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Obviously, Zach Edey is going to be dominant. Very front court heavy team, but it's going to be fun to watch what Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer can do as they continue to grow throughout their freshman seasons as very key contributors for this team. I think it's going to be a fun basketball season. Football still could be fun. I say that a little bit hesitantly because I have my doubts, but it's now or never. Purdue goes to Illinois on Saturday. They're 6-point underdogs as I say this. I think that could continue to go up. We will have a pregame podcast on Thursday this week. Since there's basketball Tuesday night, I will record the podcast Wednesday night, have it to you on Thursday. Send questions to me on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. We will get to them on the show. And until then, you all take care, enjoy college basketball, and hopefully this loss can be put to rest as we move forward in the week. Take care, everybody.